Good afternoon, everyone. This is Steve Smith for the 100th VLabForum seminar series. We're coming live to you from the VLabForum studios here in beautiful downtown Silver Spring. I'm joined here by our logistics program manager, John Chattel, and also by our weather service director, Dr. Louis Uccellini. And we have a special program today. We looked back in our books and saw that this was going to be the 100th edition of the VLabForum, and we thought we should do something a little bit different, a little bit special. So we welcome you this afternoon for that. The VLabForum actually began in 2009. At the time, it was called the RIT Forum, the Research Innovation Transition Team. When the VLab was inaugurated, we decided to rebrand the seminar series as the VLabForum. But we've been providing these monthly seminars since 2009 and have been focused on R2O and O2R exclusively. And we thought that this was a time to take stock of where we've been, look back, maybe look forward. And in that context, I'm going to hand over the microphone to Dr. Uccellini, who has some remarks. And what we're going to do, his schedule has tightened up a little bit. So what we're going to do is after Louis provides his comments, we're going to open up for questions for him. So if you would like to ask Dr. Uccellini a question or two, please use the raise your hand feature or the chat and chat your question in, and we will read it for you, or we can unmute you and you can ask your question directly. So without further ado, Louis.
Thanks, Steve, and hello to everybody out there. When I was given this opportunity, or was suggested or asked, however Steve approaches me, I saw two key aspects: VLab and R2O. And with VLab, for those who in the individual forecast offices that I've talked about, is the VLab is a fundamental development activity that we really paying close attention to. Know my interest in that, and I think from the SUE conference, you probably remember my interest in the R2O subject. But I'll recount that a little bit, and then tie into why I think this is so important, and that and I so willingly adjusted my schedule to at least partake for a period of time, and I thought I had more time, but nature abhors a vacuum, so that didn't quite work out the way I figured it would. Anyway, just for those who don't know me as well as others, I've been interested in the research to operations concept as it's developed since the 1970s. I go way back with this. I was always interested in how the research I was doing, for example, would improve operational observational systems and the forecasts themselves. And I noted in that NWA Severe Weather Conference in Des Moines several years ago, all of my research, looking back on it, was started with operational observations. And towards the end, I was using operational model output to actually do some of the model diagnostics. So I've always had that interest. I should also note that the R2O issues and the difficulties associated with it there's a cultural basis here. It goes all the way back to the post-World War II period, when pragmatic, non-degreed forecasters doing day-to-day applications, whether they be analysis or forecasting, looked down upon the high-level mathematician, physicists, new computer scientists, those that were developing real-time models. And so they just thought that those scientists were nuts, didn't really understand what a forecast was all about. Meanwhile, those providing the rigorous thermodynamic basis for understanding the atmosphere and building those models also looked down upon the operational forecast. And this is what caused the split, for example, in the AMS, which peaked at about, the split peaked in the early 70s, and it led to the creation of the NWA. It was a direct fallout from this. It was basically a cultural war that was going on between the research and the operational communities. My fundamental view as it's developed is, and with the interest to accelerate research to operations, which is where I believe the VLab is so important, it basically comes down to, if you want to accelerate R2O, we have to support O2R. Where the O could be operational observation networks, the radars are an example. Kelvin Drogemeyer's first interaction with me in Office of Meteorology was how to make the new Doppler radars in the 90s more accessible to the research community for basic research. And as an example, the models themselves, the post-processing, the reanalysis and reforecast are used extensively by the research community, and they're fundamentally important for us calibrating our ensemble model systems. So we need to recognize that this is a very important way to go. And in Europe, I'll point out, when I went to Reading University about 10 years ago, they had all of the, Reading is probably one of the strongest departments. At the time, Thorpe was there, so maybe it was 15 years ago now. Thorpe, Hoskins, a number of other folks, all the research they did was on the UK Med operational model. They didn't run any research models at all, and you could see how that turn, it was either UK Met for some of their problems, European Center for others, very important in accelerating those developments using the top minds in the country. So very important. The other thing that's happened within NOAA, as we go down this timeline, in 2007, we had the NOAA research funnel. So that, you know, from basic research all the way down to implementations with readiness levels. So we can now manage the process of how we go down that funnel based on the readiness levels. And that's the basis for the way we operate with OAR, for example, and where the money winds up and how that money is divided and the partnerships defined to make sure that we are tapping into their research more effectively. You mentioned the VLab started what year? Was it 2009? 12. Okay. So 2012, and I remember being a little bit skeptical about it when I got the first briefing. I was the NCEP director then, and then you gave me another briefing in 2013 when I was the director of the Weather Service, looking at it through a different prism, obviously. I became, as I saw people I knew using it and wanting to make it work because it really was helping it. Jeff D'Amago was one of the early people, and I know Jeff works very extensively, had worked very extensively with the field as he developed model capabilities at NCEP, was a big fan of it. And some of the seminal model development efforts in the 2013-14 was actually done through the VLab. So clearly, I was seeing it work and fostering collaborative activities. Now, with respect to the SUE meeting was in 2015. And for those who were there, I challenged the SUEs to work collectively. So the idea of SUEs and individual forecast offices just doing things for that office or advancing that office, we needed to broaden that for many reasons, not the least of which is how do you maintain all the local developments if they're only working in one office. I noted that the science and technology integration in which Steve sits in, this effort sits in, would be your home. You now have a portfolio to operate under. There was skepticism about that, but I think it's worked out well. The VLab, the VLab could be, and I said could be, right? You needed to convince yourselves that this would work. Could be the platform to bring the community together, to bring your community together in ways that you're socializing products and challenges, developing those projects, including programming, which is what NCEP was proving to me could be done on this. The data assimilation system is a case in point. To execute, test, and assess those projects. Is there a VLab project doing the review of the next generation? How is that work through VLab, or is that work?
Teams leverage the VLab.
That's right. Okay, good. and then make the result. And this is the important point here, is to make the results expandable beyond a single office. So one of the things we're writing into C-STAR grants, for example, is to work through, the student, the professor, and the offices to try to make this work through the VLab, so that if they find something that can be applied across the country, we now have a way of testing and assessing it in a more collaborative way, and accelerate the R2O. So I talked with lots of SUs and watch what's going on in terms of STI, and I get briefed on the development programs within the SU and what's being done on the VLab. And I believe very strongly that the SUs are living up to the challenges that were posed in 2015 in every way, especially the growing use of the VLab platform to increase their collaborative activity. So I hope to see how we're doing, right? I mean, that's part of what you're going over today. But I just want to make sure if there's anybody out there who has questions, give you a chance to ask those questions, and I'll try to answer them the best I can. Otherwise, we'll just go right into your agenda.
Sure. So at this point, if you'd like to ask Dr. Uccellini a question, could you use the raise your hand feature and we will unmute you, or type it in the chat. So Louis, while we're waiting to see if we get to a question, I guess I'll ask you is, what do you see as the challenges / opportunities that remain for improving R2O, that things that we still need to do?
Well, there's a couple of challenges. I think I worry about the capacity of VLab and the speed of when you get, we could be a victim of our own success. So I want to make sure that the platform itself, if it's viable and people want to use it, that it remains viable. So I believe, and we are having issues with the dissemination system. It's already hitting, one of the reasons I'm running out, is working some budget opportunities, and I want to make sure dissemination is at the table. Okay. So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect is that there's research being done across a broad spectrum of organizations, and I'm not sure why I am sure that we're not tapping into the university community as much as we should be, and that's a resource, certainly a resource issue. There are other labs that seem to be, NASA's becoming increasingly interested in working with us. NASA is part of the data assimilation team. NASA's on the FV3. NASA's actually used the FV3 dynamic core for years before us. It's are we tapping into all, there could be an increasing demand for our services in working the R2O process or the O2R process. And my main concern is that part of the budget is usually underfunded. People don't recognize the amount of infrastructure and work that's needed to build that capability and sustain it. And this is why I believe the SU program is going to be so important now and into the future in working this issue, because it is a group of really smart people who have contacts either through the university or some laboratories, and we have to make sure that we're tapping into these research opportunities as they present themselves the most effective manner.
Okay, John, do we have any?
It doesn't appear so.
Okay. Well, one more though.
Sure.
How do you see the private sector, which is growing and involved in the R2O to our picture? And
that's the other part. Yeah, that's the other part of the growing structure, and that the extent to which it's not just the private sector; it's the nonprofits as well. You got a growing number of nonprofit organizations that actually are working with our operational systems and develop. And there are ways of dealing with this through CRADAs and all that. But that could be a growth aspect that could outpace the abilities of CRADA even. So we'll have to keep our eye on that. But there's clearly increasing interest outside of our normal, types of organizations that we're used to working with, universities, research labs, other agencies, however you want to define that. That could become increasingly important as we move forward. And we see this in the satellite arena. It's clearly that's happening. And it could happen in other arenas as well. Radar, potentially radar. So we'll just have to see how that plays out.
Well, thank you very much, Louis. Appreciate you coming and kicking off our 100th VLab Forum.
Yeah, and I'll hang for about 10 minutes.
Okay.
Right.
All right. So we're going to transition now to my talk. And I want to say that these are my views as somebody who has been working within Weather Service to transition R2O projects into our operations for many years, as well as my more recent role is trying to improve that process within the Office of Science and Technology Integration. So they're my views and no one else's, so you can give me the credit or the blame, however you feel. Next slide, John. So we've been working on R2O as a strategic concern for a long time in Weather Service. So I look back at some of our strategic plans back to in August 1999. We had one under the Jack Kelly era, and it explicitly looked and pointed out that we wanted to reduce the time required to implement proven research and technology and operations. And then more recently in 2011, R2O was called out in that plan, which was sort of the Weather Ready Nation plan. And it talks about developing partnerships with the research community and again, accelerating the transition of research and operations. So we've been looking at this problem for quite a while and trying to improve it. Next slide. And then in 2013, there was the NAPA study, the National Academy of Public Administration, which was really a call to action for the National Weather Service. They recommended ensuring that R2O and O2R receive the appropriate priority and support. The panel recommended that it consolidate the current distributed management of this function, which is why the STI portfolio came about and the Office of Science and Technology Integration. So we actually delivered on this piece that was in the NAPA study. Next slide. So again, looking back over these 9 years, I've sort of tried, this is not, there may be things missing from here, but I tried to pick up the main topics. So in this time, we've established the NOAA Testbed and Proving Ground Committee. Louis was involved with this. Before there were these test beds and they were sort of operating independently of one another, and we sort of corralled them and gave them some structure. So I said the SDNI portfolio, a budget exclusively dedicated to R2O or SDNI. We created a headquarters office, and NOAA stood up what they call the Line Office Transition Managers Committee, which is a group of folks in each line office that work together to try to improve transitions across line offices as well as internal line offices. There's been some policy written at the NOAA level and the Weather Service level. Mainly this brought into play the readiness level concept that we're now operating on. And when we talk to the other NOAA line offices about this, this readiness level concept is front and center for that. As part of SCI, we stood up the Operations Proving Ground in Kansas City. Kim Runk's the director, and this has proven invaluable for a number of areas. Things are now being tested or proven out before they go into operations to determine if they're ready and they are delivering on the concept, et cetera. So we have that in place. It's under-resourced, but it is, doing as best as it can. We stood up the virtual lab. Louis already talked about that. Our Weather Service governance explicitly talks about how we do R2O and O2R and how we need to have requirements, and we can't just be completely innovating without any guidelines. And so there is a process now that we're trying to follow. It's not perfect, but it's certainly better than we had before. In the 2015, Louis mentioned this as well, the pseudo project. So we had a big event, and all the SUs came in, and Louis talked about the follow-up, and we needed to. You just can't talk about having projects, but we need to organize them and follow them and track them, and that's what Dave Myrick has been largely honchoing since 2015 to much success. R2O funding opportunities have increased, and they use the language of transition and reference the readiness levels. So in our vernacular in NOAA and Weather Service, this RL readiness level is taking root. The Weather Act has come along even more recently, and this also talks about the importance of R2O. The Evolved Program Management Office. So we've certain high-level projects implied in all of these things are some research and development, or certainly development, and that's a part of the R2O. And finally, we've been dinged for a long time about being an insular group developing models without collaborating and working with the greater weather enterprise. And so now that's changing too. Henrik Tolman has taken the lead, and there's now unified modeling communities that are working with EMC and others, NASA and so forth, to address it. So there's a lot of stuff has happened in this intervening 9 years that represents tangible results in improving. Next slide, John. So I wanted to revisit, this was a talk that I gave, or excerpted from a talk that I gave at the pseudo meeting in September 2015, and in that talk we talked about the key factors to success. Next slide, John. And those being, you need people, culture, and capacity. If you don't have all these three things firing on all cylinders, then your R2O is going to be suboptimal. So we're going to take a look at how, the progress we've made since 2015 in these areas. Next. So we identified there the need for key partnerships, where you got the SUs, the DOEs, SSDs, and development orgs working together, no longer sort of silos of excellence, but actually addressing these challenges that the agency faces together in partnerships. And this is certainly greatly improved and taken root. I mean, ST&I is sort of at the front and center of that. You see every permutation possible of EMC, MDL, and service centers working on things. Again, Dave Myrick and the field-driven R2O is key to that. And the pseudo distributed R2O is taking place maybe a little bit less than we would like, but there certainly are now development groups in the Weather Service, in field offices actually, that are using VLab, and they're managing their software in the Redmine projects, and they have releases that they provide to different WFOs in different regions, and ITOs are working to maximize the efficiency of these efforts. So I think we are walking the walk to a large degree. Next, please. So this is a funnel. This is an interpretation of Louis' funnel to the Weather Service context that we showed back again at that pseudo conference. And you can see what we were looking at is the different sources of R&D being, those green bubbles. You can hit the forward, John. So all of that is sort of your STI, and different projects make their way from, some of them into NOAA testbed, some of them into the OPG, some of them are fast track, almost all of them are using VLab right now. And the idea is to get to RL9. Now I'm going to get to the RL9 in a minute here, but
you should emphasize that those are the readiness levels that I refer to.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is the way we're managing our service level agreements and money exchange between the Weather Service and OAR, for example, depending on what readiness level we have, right, and the priorities inherent in those levels. So I just want to let people know that this is actually driving the budget decisions actually budget execution on any given fiscal year.
The one thing, the purple arrow you see up there, the CDTE, was Centralized Development Testing Environment. Now, we had intended to build that out in IDP at the time. That has not been realized. So we're looking to try to do that sort of thing in a commercial cloud at this point. Talk a little bit about that in a minute. Next slide, John. So in terms of, growth, I've this slide shows the number of the usage trends for VLab, the so-called collaboration and development services over a 4-year period, and we've just seen lots and lots of growth. Now, this isn't just, of course, the Weather Service field-driven R2O projects. You have all of AWIP's development. You have all of EMC's software management on their modeling, the National Water Center, and very big development efforts that are major R2O pathways and off-ramps onto our operational systems are included in these metrics. So VLab is a tool that we rely on and depend on across the agency now. And people are working at it from, everywhere from, Paducah to Honolulu and everywhere in between. Next, John. We've seen growth in our core users. The number of projects and communities have increased over time inexorably. Next slide, John. And this is finally reflected in sort of intellectual property, a sort of big output of NOAA of all the investment in R&D is software. And more software is being managed and accessed on a day-to-day basis in the VLab. We see at times, concurrent users just on our collaboration services of up to 80 people at a time. And if you add in the Redmine side, the development side, is probably another 80 or so. So there's somebody working on, like the British Empire, the sun never sets on the VLab, and people are working around the clock, basically doing R2O in the VLab platform. Next slide. We mentioned the pseudo project. So actually in the VLab, Dave Myrick and the field-driven R2O team and SDNI have been tracking using the pseudo projects dashboard the progress on these projects. Next. And things have been moving along. We have been doing the follow through. So you can see the trend in 15, right after the pseudo conference, there were 5 projects, and it's been initiated another 10, etc. So there are currently 14 projects that are active in the VLab, and another 4 are on track to be completed in FY19. So this is this is only the field-driven R2O. It doesn't include AWIPs and the models and all that other stuff. But Dave has done an outstanding job at working with the SSDs and the pseudo community to be disciplined and organized and follow through on these projects. Next. And we have success stories. We have been able to fast track some things. I'll put the Prob Severe up there. I guess it was 2 years ago. The SSDs came to the annual operating plan meeting for SCI and said, we got to have this Prob Severe. It's being used operationally or quasi-operationally. It had been through the OPG. We need to get this into operations. And so we figured out a way to do that. We leveraged the MRMS system, and within 12 months, we fast-tracked that baby and got it into operations. So hopefully in January, it's going to be available at every Weather Service forecast office through the AWIPs to use. Dave Hotz in the Near Storm Environmental Awareness Project, that was a SUE-driven project that, again, went into VLab as well as the OPG. It was proven out in the OPG, and that's going to be delivered in a build of AWIPs coming up soon. The multi-radar, multi-sensor, this one goes back prior to VLab, actually, where in the Office of Science and Technology, there was an effort to tee up this as something that would be ready to go, and we would be we're looking for a funding opportunity and to get it to Weather Service operations. Hurricane Sandy came along, and we got that funding, and the MRMS went into the IDP system in College Park, and it's been running there ever since. And now with the hurricane supplemental from the last year's set of hurricanes, we're looking at improving that system and perhaps moving it towards the supercomputer. The National Blend of Models and the RTMA have been using the VLab feedback forums to provide a dynamic way for developers and forecasters to communicate on how this new output, which is critical for Weather Service operations, is delivering. The weather archive and visualization environment, the WAVE, is another success story. Bill Rash out in Sacramento has been leading this effort, and it's been used for IDSS, et cetera. It's now being looked at by the OAR's GSD in Boulder, and to be included in considerations for our so-called unified graphics effort within Weather Service. The FE3 GFS VLab community and code management is another big one. So now EMC is from the ground level, from the get-go, have been working in the VLab to execute the FE3 GFS. There's both a public and a private community for this in the VLab. So researchers from around the world can go to that public community and learn about the FE3 GFS. They're looking to do further collaboration in the unified model realm using github.com. So that's all been enabled thanks to SDNI's efforts. In the satellite training operations resource, the STORE community has been a big leg up for Weather Service in terms of satellite training and satellite information. Next slide, John. So we go back to the how are we doing kind of thing. In my view, the first two, people and culture, we've gone a long way certainly since 2015 in addressing these things. And I think across the board, there's been a big commitment to improving. People are now using, version control and these technologies like Get and Garrett, et cetera, to manage code. And these best practices are being promulgated throughout the agency. We've really, raised all boats. Where we're falling short, however, in my view, is on the capacity. The efficient and adaptable IT infrastructure is really much short of the mark. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a second. Next slide. So where are we falling short and what opportunities exist? So there's currently a backlog of, we'll call RL8 projects that are awaiting implementation on all our major NWS operational systems, the IDP, the supercomputer, and AWIPS. These are our main on-ramps into operations, and all of them are severely bottlenecked for mainly due to resources, human resources that are needed in order to do the proper integration and testing to integrate these RL8 projects into our Weather Service operations. The IDP has a backlog of, maybe up to 40 projects. The supercomputer, they have about 20 so-called slots that they have every year for model upgrades and model implementations, and about a list of maybe 40 potential ones that they could take on if they had the resources. And AWIPS requires Raytheon development and testing resources in order to also take on projects that have been identified as high priority by the SDREC, for example. So we have a problem with that. We have plenty of, you could say, that are technically mature, scientifically validated things that could, and in theory, benefit our operations, but we cannot get them into our operational systems easily, and we find ourselves waiting an inordinate amount of time for those transitions to take place. So in Weather Service, the O in operations generally means a FSMA high, 24/7, 365, 99.9 uptime kind of system. And this is really expensive to maintain. It's inflexible to adapt and slow to evolve. So, however, many of these R2O projects probably don't need that kind of a robust, high availability operating environment in order to be successful. A lot of things seem to fall into the area of situational awareness, improving situational awareness. And for that, you don't need to have something that's, always operating. There is, of course, some core software that is needed for dissemination and issuance of warnings and so forth that really does need an environment, but probably a lot of things don't. And unfortunately, we only have one flavor of operational system, which is generally this really robust, high availability type of system. Another area where we're falling short is that the O&M footprint on our operations is just growing inexorably. So we implement these new things, and then we're sort of signing up to maintain them forever. And the O&M tail just kind of never goes away. And this means that there has to be scientific and technical expertise to support these operations and applications and guidance for forever. There's no formal sunsetting process in place for IDP, supercomputer, or AWIPS. This was called out in the Weather Act. I've taken this out of the Weather Act itself. You can see in the cyan letters there, it says a process to sunset outdated and expensive operational methods. So the Weather Act calls this out, and so this represents an opportunity, I think, for Weather Service to try to reduce the cost of O&M and maybe make some room for some new things to get into these operational systems. However, we got to keep in mind that just like we have a shortage of resources to onboard new things, to take things off of these operational systems also requires resources. So it's not like you can just turn something off. To decommission something from a software baseline takes a deliberate, disciplined process that needs resources as well. So perhaps in some cases it's cheaper to keep things operating than to actually turn them off. The last slide, John. So the takeaways here in this look back over the last 9 years is that, in my view only, maybe shared with others, is that much tangible progress has been made towards improving R2 over the last 9 years. I mean, there's no doubt about it. We're strategically in a better place. We're doing a much better job at managing R2O and innovation with the agency. This is a big criticism that we took from the NAPA study and other studies. However, we are unable to onboard technically mature and scientifically validated R&D projects and operations at a sufficient pace, which results in delays and a growing backlog of projects that are waiting to transition. So there's a lot of low-hanging fruit, and sometimes this fruit is starting to rot on the tree and fall to the ground because we can't get it into operations quickly enough. So perhaps, and we can talk about this in the Q&A if you'd like, to alleviate this backlog, perhaps we need to consider establishing a tiered approach to weather service operations rather than the current one-size-fits-all. In other words, you have a hard O for the things that really need that, but then you have a maybe softer operations that don't necessarily need that robust high availability environment to be successful. In a sense, you know, in a city environment, there's lots of modes of ground transportation that fits the needs. People they take the bus, they ride bicycles, they walk, they drive their car, etc. But in Weather Services urban environment, we only have one solution, and that's an Abrams tank. It's built for IT security, and but it's really cumbersome to handle the so-called agile R2O that we need. So it seems like this is one place we can look to try to alleviate the inflexible kind of environment and predicament that we find ourselves in with regard to resources to bring new things on board. So I think that's the last one, John.
Yeah, there's one more there.
All right, so at this point, we can take questions on any topic. Forgot to mention that Dr. Dave Myrick is also with us here in the VLabForum studios. So if you want to ask Dave a question, go ahead and do that. And if there are any questions for Dr. Uccellini, he's had to leave, but we can write those down and take them to him after the session's over with. So, John?
We have several questions that apparently I will have to relay to you. So the first one for Mark Vincent. Should National Weather Service develop a metric for the number of legacy processes, tools, sunset or retired as a companion to the R2A metric?
Well, in terms of motivating us to get with the idea of sunsetting things, perhaps that's a good way to go. You can't start getting better at something unless you find a way to track it, etc. But I really think we first need to establish some perhaps processes where we look at the needs of these operational systems and check to see if the things that are currently in operations are performing as intended and are being used as they were intended. And if not, we need to, sunset them, decommission them, or whatever.
Okay. And let's see, Mark also would like to know, what are the best formal sources of NWS requirements that OAR can use for grant priorities?
So we have our cards process, which is part of the Weather Service governance. And Mark, we can send you a link to that if you're weren't aware. That has replaced our old requirements process. And these are for mission requirements, which are sort of at a high level of abstraction. And what we're finding in our Weather Service governance is that those may be good to kind of for organizations like OAR to try to roughly, prototype and develop things, but they're not sufficient, or they're not in sufficient detail to actually do a lot of development from. So we're working internally on improving, sort of adding another level of requirements below that would be, I guess, more actionable in terms of R&D shops looking at and saying, hey, we can build that. Let's take a try.
Okay. Jack Sellemeyer would like to know, have any resources been put toward enabling that Weather Act idea of smoothing joint tech transfer?
Jack, not to my knowledge. It's a good question. I think people are still reading the Weather Act and understanding what the implications are of it. It is a law, so we have to comply with it. And I believe there is accountability baked in. So if we don't deliver, then we could probably be in trouble. But I'm personally not aware yet, anyway, of where that one stands.
By the way, he also wanted to mention that he loves the tiered approach, especially the use of the cloud, i.e. NOAA Geo platform.
Yeah, Jack. So we love that. Well, the tiered approach, I think, is probably the way we got to go. And here in MDL, we are, as we speak, we are now beginning to use the Amazon Web Services to migrate some of our R&D off of our old hard system that we called MDLNet and extend its boundaries into the Amazon Web Services cloud. We really are excited about that. It is kind of a risk reduction exercise for us to determine, how to manage cloud services, how to do R&D and development in commercial cloud services. So we're just getting our feet wet, but our initial foray looks very, very promising. And I think it's going to go a long way to helping SD&I become, at least up to RL8, more agile and flexible with doing development. It does not yet alleviate the question about creating this tiered operations environment, because that's going to require some, I think, bigger questions to be addressed. But to the degree that it demystifies the use of commercial cloud services for any purpose, I think it's a really important thing, and I encourage other groups within Weather Service and NOAA in general to explore that. And I know they are. I know NOS is doing that, and I know OAR is. So hopefully that's going to be quickly blazing a path to some better posture, I guess, with regard to R2O.
Jack, I did want to follow up. He says, are there details on MDL's AWS foray that can be seen?
Not yet. We just started last month, so we're still setting things up and as a lot of details, but we would certainly love to share that with the greater SDNI community or greater Weather Service community, Jack, as soon as we can. So we'll take that as a seminar or two to come down the line when we've better done an assessment. But we will definitely do that. Thanks for that question.
All righty. JJ Brost at Southern Region Headquarters wanted to thank you for this briefing. He hates to put you on the spot, but it sounds like some of our challenges involve a bottleneck at IDP. He asks, is he off base? And then he goes on to ask, what can we do to help them? For instance, what about a sandbox environment where we could develop and vet ideas and only push the best of the best to IDP, thus reducing IDP load? Thanks.
Yeah, JJ, that's a really excellent question. Now, I think our vetting of what needs to get in operations has gotten a lot more robust and better than it was. So I don't think we're pushing things into operations that shouldn't be in operations as far as they being technically mature and scientifically validated. Now, you could argue, and that's what I was trying to argue, that maybe some of those things that we're pushing into IDP and AWIPS and the supercomputer don't need to be in that really expensive FSMA high environment. They could be in some other type of lower cost environment, but we don't have that. So there's the rub. So we are, I think we're going to, in some sense, we could be making the problem worse if the SDNI begins using the commercial cloud services to actually do more accelerated development up to RL8. Things become proven out more rapidly up to RL8, but the disconnect between the operational environment, which is the target RL9, and our cloud-enabled environment to develop and prototype may be getting larger. And there is that sort of a strategic problem unless we come up with a way that says there should be an IDP light or some other form of an IDP environment that doesn't have the needs for a high availability type of production.
That seems to be all the current questions we have.
All right. Well, very good. I want to thank everyone for participating, not just today, but over the last 9 years for this seminar series. I think we put it in place to try to create an environment where R2O could be discussed, where projects that were either going into operations or were being considered for weather service operations could be discussed in a sort of collegial fashion. We've endeavored to provide, topical things for this that are on a lot of people's minds, and bring principal investigators and developers to here so that we could allow the operations folks and Sues and Does and others to ask questions and be exposed to some of these things so they were aware of them well before they were getting to weather service operations. I think we've come pretty close to that. And we're not going away. This is just a milestone. It's kind of artificial, but we did want to make a note of it. And I looked at John and I said, geez, we've been doing this for 9 years. You got to be kidding me. So it is the truth, folks. Time flies when you're having fun. So anyway, I want to thank everyone for participating. Thanks I hope you enjoyed Dr. Uccellini's remarks. And we have one more VLab forum in this calendar year coming up in November. Greg Stump is going to be presenting hazard services, probabilistic hazard information, the hazard services fee project, 3 years of experiments in the hazardous weather test bed. This is a talk that Greg gave at the last annual meeting of the National Weather Association. It's a really good talk. I think they have done a great job, and this is Greg, who's out in Norman. He works for MDL, but he works also with Tracy Hansen and GSD and Boulder and other folks at NSSL. It's a really good overview topic, and is kind of the, in my view, really interesting to see the progress that's been made there and the progress that is still yet to be made for this is part of the Facets fee effort or program, if you will. So I hope you can join us on November 28th for that. We'll take the holidays off in December with no forum, but then be back in January with a topic yet to be determined. So thanks, everyone. Signing off.